Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's training, which is hosted by Saratoga County. This training is an overview of model solar energy law, and Camille Warner of NYSERDA's Clean Energy Siting Team is the trainer for this course. My name is Haley Balkanoff. I'm a sustainability planner at the Capital District Regional Planning Commission, or CDRPC for short. For those of you that don't know us, CDRPC is a regional planning resource center that serves Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady counties. We foster intergovernmental cooperation and facilitate regional initiatives. Today's training is offered as part of NYSERDA's Clean Energy Communities program, which provides match-free grant funding to local governments for clean energy projects such as facility energy audits, building and HVAC upgrades, electric vehicle charging stations, and LED streetlight conversions. If you're interested in seeking funding for any clean energy projects, I'd be happy to provide free technical support and assistance. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Our attendees join with video and audio off. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions. This training will be recorded and slides available after the training is complete. And with that, I will pass it off to Camille to get us started.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I will begin by sharing my screen. So hi, good morning. My name is Camille Warner. I am on the Clean Energy Siting Team, and I'm happy to speak with you today about our model energy law. So this is very briefly the agenda that we'll go through. I'll give you a brief introduction, kind of talk about why you're seeing these technologies in your communities. I'll kind of tear apart the solar law, and at the end, Q&A. So as Haley mentioned, definitely throw any questions you have into the chat. Just an introduction to my team. So I'm on the Clean Energy Siting Team, and our team offers a number of different resources to empower local governments with knowledge, training, best practices, etc., to manage responsibly sited clean energy development in your communities across the state. These resources include step-by-step instructions and tools to guide the implementation of these different technologies. We'll talk to communities from anything related to property taxes, siting, zoning, decommissioning, and so much more. One of the things I'm really proud of is that we're constantly looking for new ways to improve our resources. In our newest resource, you'll see that the bottom screen is called Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA guide, and it's specifically geared towards local governments and other tax-exempt entities looking to take advantage of federal funding with respect to solar and storage projects. But today, as you know, we'll focus on solar. If you guys have any questions, that's our kind of email that you can reach us at, and that's the landing page for our homepage where you can find all of these resources. So why are these projects, solar, battery storage, wind, etc., why are these coming up in your communities? So the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, aka the Climate Act, was signed into law in 2019. And this law basically demonstrates New York's commitment to fighting climate change, transforming our economies, and building what's known as resilient communities. It's basically setting the path, if you will, for a zero-emission electric sector and for decarbonizing the economy. So there are a number of different goals. So there are aggressive greenhouse reduction goals, so like 40% reduction by 2030, 85% by 2050. There's what's known as electricity sector goals, so things like 70% renewable energy by 2030, 100% by 2040. And then there's technology specific goals like 10,000 megawatts of distributed solar, 3,000 megawatts of energy storage, etc. And so you can see that New York is kind of pushing towards this green economy. This is a snapshot of where we are today. You can see in the image our use of coal, which is kind of this brown figure that you can see at the bottom, has decreased significantly, which is really good. And our use of renewable energy, especially wind power, has increased significantly. So what is the state doing? So the state has a distributed solar program called New York Sun. Distributed solar is basically distributed energy resources. So these are technologies that generate or store electricity, either for homes or businesses to manage the home or business's energy use. DR projects, distributed energy resources, are typically 5 megawatts and less, and they typically must have an off-taker to purchase the electricity. So New York Sun is a program where you can get different incentives and financing for residents, commercial solar developers, and then educational resources for homeowners, local governments, etc. It really does further the community solar market, allowing residents who are unable to actually put solar on their roof to benefit from nearby projects. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And I just updated this figure yesterday. So our total capacity is just over 5,000, or just actually close to 6,000 megawatts, which is kind of exciting. And again, this is just reflecting the non-residential small solar facilities. So this doesn't include rooftop. We also have our kind of larger renewable program, so large scale renewables, also called LSR. We offer different solicitation programs to procure or buy renewable energy certificates from these facilities. So you can see these are your larger projects, and the map kind of illustrates where they are scattered throughout the state. So jumping into solar and why we're here today. So to provide a little bit of basis for the presentation, there are three major types of solar energy that are most commonly used. There's solar photovoltaics, which is basically the most common technology that you'll see in New York State. There's concentrated solar power and solar thermal. So solar PV takes energy from the sun and converts it directly into electricity. And this technology is not new. It's been around for decades. Concentrated solar power technology uses mirrors to reflect and concentrate the sunlight into a receiver. And then that energy from the heat increases the temperature and creates kind of thermal energy. It's pretty expensive, and again, not something you'll see in New York State. And then solar thermal is maybe something you've seen on a smaller scale. Solar thermal systems collect and concentrate sunlight to produce high temperature heat to generate electricity. So it's similar to concentrated power, but it functions a little bit differently. For this presentation, we're going to focus primarily on solar PV. There are two ways to define solar systems. You can define it based on the size and the function of the system, or you can define it where the PV system sits in relation to the electric grid. So for the first one, talking about the size and function, we have three different types: residential, commercial, and utility scale. So residential systems are pretty straightforward. These are your very small systems. They're installed on your homes or in your businesses, and they provide power or electricity directly to offset the use at that location. Residential systems include rooftop systems. Commercial systems are a little bit larger, and they're not directly offsetting that exact location. Electricity is put on the grid, and people who live kind of around a community solar project can subscribe to that project and receive discounts on their electricity bill. That's kind of why it's called a community. So the community can kind of participate, even if they're unable to put solar on their parcel, on their piece of land. And then we have utility scale projects, and these are very, very large projects, starting typically 5 megawatts and larger, but you'll normally see projects that are about 20 megawatts. You can see 100 megawatts, 200 megawatts, etc. So that's the kind of first way you define solar PV systems. The second way is, like I said, where it sits in relation to the energy grid. So you have two types. You have what's called behind the meter systems or in front of the meter systems. Behind the meter systems refers to the energy system's location with respect to the utility meter. So behind the meter systems, the power is used actually on site. The system is behind the meter. For utility scale projects, these are much larger, or front of the meter systems. These projects are generate energy, and that energy is immediately put onto the grid, and then it's distributed from there. So for community solar projects, that energy isn't necessarily providing electricity to that location. It's being sent to the grid, and then it's being distributed. just to think about scale for a little bit. So 5 to 8 acres it takes per megawatt, and this varies based on parcel constraints, system design, environmental considerations, etc. And then per megawatt, each megawatt can power anywhere between 100 and 200 homes. So permitting. These systems depends on the size of the installation. So projects that are less than 25 megawatts are permitted with you at the local level through seeker, through whatever municipal requirements you have. So site plan review, special use permit, etc. Projects that are larger than 25 megawatts are permitted at the state level through the old Article 10 or the kind of newer Office of Renewable Energy Siting and Electric Transmission, aka ORES. So it is important to make sure you have a tier or a group of in your local law that speaks to these larger projects, and we'll go into that in a little bit. These are a number of the land use and local considerations that you should have when it comes to solar. And definitely, we're going to tear this kind of slide apart in great detail. But interconnection's a big one, bulk area standards, environmental impacts, decommissioning, visual impacts, taxation, etc. So the big question of the day is, what should a municipality do before drafting or updating a solar law? So the first thing I recommend, or we recommend you do, is take a look at any existing plans or policies you have in the book. If you have a sustainability plan or a climate action plan, just skim through it, because you want to make sure the law that you updates or create is in line with those plans. Or it could be an opportunity to update those plans to ensure consistency. Take a look at the hosting capacity maps, and this is a big one. In the next 2 or 3 slides, we'll kind of tear it apart a little bit. So understanding where solar development is economic and possible to make sure you consider how to zone for it properly. Take a look at your comprehensive plan if your community has one. If not, maybe consider adopting one or updating it if it needs to be adopted or updated. And the last two are pretty important. Conducting outreach with the community, you want to make sure that everyone has a voice in this process, and then as needed, create a working group with subject matter experts to make sure that you're creating amendments and removing barriers to facilitate solar energy development in your community. So hosting capacity. This is a little bit of a fun kind of bear to tackle, if you will. So hosting capacity, it refers to an estimate of the location and quantity of new energy resources like solar and how it can be connected to the grid, period. The utility's main goal is to make sure that all systems, any solar energy, wind, etc., that these systems are hooked up to the grid in such a way that it doesn't compromise the integrity, safety, or the quality of their service. So they have online what's called hosting capacity maps. And so you can kind of see how that works here. And we'll click through these. So talking through the different parts of kind of an interconnection system. So we have electrical substations. These substations can increase or step up voltage to transmit electricity from the solar facility. You can see them in 2 different locations. You have transmission systems, and this is the movement of high voltage electricity. So from moving electricity from the solar facility to a substation. And then you have your distribution lines, and these are lines that you see around when you're driving to your community. So they're typically much, much smaller. So hosting capacity and taking a look at hosting capacity maps are very important. It allows you to understand where the energy distribution infrastructure is located in your community, and then it can tell you a snapshot view of the available capacity at that location. And I have an example on the next slide. So you can see outlined in purple is a town in New York, and the kind of various rainbow colored lines, those are the available capacity from the hosting capacity map. So the dark red means that there's no capacity, and all the way up to the blue, which means there is quite a bit of capacity, about 5 megawatts. And hosting capacity maps are looking at when you look at hosting capacity maps, you're considering projects that are up to 5 megawatts. So these are going to be your community scale projects that's going to be hooking up to these distribution lines. So you can see in this community, there is not a lot of distribution lines in this kind of northern part of the parcel, but there is some amount on the western side. The next thing you want to do when you're looking at hosting capacity map is you want to overlay your zoning map so you can understand how zoning and capacity relates. Keep in mind that the hosting capacity map is a snapshot. It's updated maybe monthly-ish, depends on the utility company. So it isn't a guarantee that that's how much capacity is available. But you want to overlay your zoning and see where solar would be feasible in your community. And again, this is for community scale projects, so projects that are 5 megawatts or less. The next map you want to take a look at are your transmission line locations. And you can see the transmission lines are using the key here with the reds and the oranges, and the same purple outline highlights the town's boundary. And you can see possibly utility scale projects might be proposed in close to these lines here. And so the next thing you do is you overlay your zoning map, and you can see what zones a developer might try to propose a project in. The difference between this transmission line map and the other map is this map doesn't show you the capacity. It simply tells you the location of the maps. In both of these instances, the developer will need to do a very expensive and complicated interconnection study where they send their application to the utility company, and the utility company says, you can connect, you can't connect, this is how much it's going to cost for upgrades, etc. So I do recommend you take a look at hosting capacity maps and your transmission lines to understand where solar development is feasible. A developer isn't going to try to extend lines, I would say, more than half a mile, because it is very expensive to do so. So they typically align with the location of these distribution or transmission lines. So comprehensive planning. This is a big one, and we actually have a guidebook specific to comprehensive planning. You want to make sure that your comprehensive plan, whether you have one and you're looking to update one or you're looking to create a new one, you want to make sure that it's a representation of the jurisdiction's priorities and policies. You want to make sure that, again, you engage the public to make sure everyone is on the same page, and you want to make sure your solar law aligns with your comprehensive plan. And having one gives you access to grants and various incentives. And I have a couple links at the end of my chat that talks about that. So this is kind of a flow chart that walks municipalities through whether or not you need to update or create a new comprehensive plan. So, walking through it, does your community have a comprehensive plan? If yes, was it adopted 10 years ago? A lot of things were different 10 years ago. Perhaps it needs to be updated or amended. And if not, perhaps you can create a new one that includes your clean energy community goals. So feel free to toss in the chat whether or not you have a comprehensive plan in your community, or if you're looking to adopt one or modify it, or etc. The next kind of topic we'll go over is land use moratoria. So moratoria is a way to reasonably suspend for a reasonable time property owners' rights to obtaining developmental permits. So if you are actively working to update your model law, your comprehensive plan, and you want to give the community time to formalize these new laws, it would be a good time to put in a moratorium so you understand the various different aspects of regulating renewable energy facilities. But keep in mind, the key word here is reasonable. You want to make sure you don't impact landowner and community's ability to develop their land. So it does need to be in a very specific time frame and have legal standing. For instance, like a 10-year moratorium or a 5-year moratorium isn't one that would kind of have any legal standing. because in that time you're supposed to be doing kind of constructive work to update laws, put together a comprehensive plan, etc. So the next kind of section we'll go over is how to choose a regulatory tool for solar. So there's three major ways that you can regulate solar or choose to regulate solar. You can do conventional zoning, and this is where you select different zoning districts the solar can be in, and then that solar will either fit with the accessory use or secondary or special use within that zoning district. So for instance, you can say that community solar is completely allowed in all rural residential districts, that orange bucket there. So it's using the existing zoning districts to say solar is allowed here, solar is allowed there, etc. It is a very popular way. I'd say it's probably the most popular way that I know that municipalities use, because again, it's easier, it's very familiar to implement and enforce. The second way you can kind of regulate solar is creating what's called an overlay zone. And this may be preferred if the municipality wishes to define very specific areas which solar development should be allowed in if it doesn't align with current zoning boundaries. It may take additional time and resources because it does require the municipality to evaluate the entire community based on factors of concern, so proximity to electric infrastructure, topography, etc. And using those different criteria, you can then draw boundaries over the existing zoning map. So in this instance, solar would be allowed in parts of rural residential and parts of light industrial. It's kind of like putting another layer on top of it. And then we have our third way of looking at soling, the floating zones. And this does offer some flexibility in terms of identifying appropriate and preferred areas for solar development. So in this instance, the developer would apply to have a floating zone over a particular parcel that they think is that they think is appropriate for development. A municipality would evaluate that application for the floating zone, and if they agree that that parcel is a great floating zone, then they would approve that application and then go through reviewing the actual project. It does create some uncertainty to developers who must invest in submitting that initial application. So keep in mind there might be a little bit additional work up front to use this method. So jumping into our solar guidebook. So you can see the number of chapters that we have, and I'm not going to go through every section. I can very easily spend hours and hours on this guidance, but do keep in mind that all of this is here and on our website. And we're more than happy to talk to your communities about each and every one of these chapters in great detail, possibly more than you would like. Today we're going to focus on Chapter 10, our Model Solar Energy Local Law. This is kind of the outline of the sections, and we'll go piece by piece and walk it through. This model law is an all-inclusive ordinance. It's intended to provide a very thorough review of all aspects of solar energy systems that can be regulated. It gives the municipalities the flexibility to choose options that work best for you. So definitely review it and adopt it to fit your local municipality. So the first section is the authority. It's much like any other local law. This section references the appropriate zoning statutes, including New York Municipal Home Rule Law, which enables the adoption of zoning ordinances, including this. The grayed out areas are kind of your choose your own adventure. So if you're a town, you'll select the town. If you're a village, you'll select a village, etc. But whenever you see these grayed out sections, that's a choose your own adventure. You can choose it to meet the needs of your community. So section 1 is pretty straightforward, just that you have the authority to make this local law. The second section is a statement of purpose. So this section really should align with your comprehensive plan or any other kind of community policy or plan that you have in the community. If it doesn't, it might potentially render the law useless. So do keep in mind that you're consistent in reviewing all of your other municipalities' documents. So pretty straightforward and nothing terribly outside of the norm here. The next section is the definitions, and I'll spend a little bit of time on this to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. So tier 1, so in our model law, we have 4 tiers. Tier 1, these are your residential systems. These are roof mounted or building integrated, or they can be ground mounted up to a nameplate capacity of 25 kilowatts. So these are very, very small systems. Or they're your on-farm systems. So again, very small rooftop systems. Sometimes they're ground mounted, but again, up to 25 kilowatts. Your tier 2 systems are a little bit larger. They go up to 1 megawatt, and they generate no more than 110% of the energy used on site. This is another residential system. So very, very small, up to 1 megawatt. Tier 3 systems are up to a little bit larger. These are your community scale projects. They're up to 5 megawatts or 40 acres. So that's tier 3. And then tier 4 are any projects that are larger than 5 megawatts. And it's important to call this out to make sure that you when ORES reviews the application, they take a look at your law. So it's important to speak to tier 4 systems in your local law. The next couple slides are just kind of images to visualize. So tier 1, again, these are your very small systems, your rooftop systems, building integrated, up to 25 kilowatts AC, alternating current. Your tier 2 systems, again, these are up to 1 megawatt or and they generate up to 110% of the electricity used on site. So it's just for on-site use to provide electricity to that home, to that business, etc. Tier 3 systems are quite a bit larger, about 40 acres. They think of like a single parcel, if you will. And you can see images of them here. So again, they're up to 5 megawatts AC. And then you have your tier 4 systems, and these systems take up usually a number of parcels that are connected with wiring to make sure that the electricity flows the way it's supposed to. So these are systems that are greater than 5 megawatts. They include all projects that are reviewed by the state. And again, you do want to make sure you speak to these systems specifically in your model law. The next section is pretty straightforward. It is the applicability. So, you know, if any modifications happen, more than 5%, they will need a new permit application. You know, pretty straightforward. General requirements, so making sure that every project receives a building permit. Any construction plans are stamped and signed by a professional engineer or an architect, someone that knows the trade. Going through seeker as required by DEC, and then making sure the system is designed in accordance with all applicable codes. So the fire code, building code, New York State Energy Conservation Code, and any codes that you have on the books. And then the town, the municipality, can impose any legal fees to recover the cost of reviewing the application. It's not expected that every municipality is a subject matter expert on reviewing these applications. So if a third party needs to come in to review the applications, this is where you can recover some of the expenses associated with actually reviewing that application. Jumping into permitting these projects. So this slide sort of summarizes it pretty well. So tier 1 projects, we recommend that they're permitted in all districts. Again, these are very, very small projects. They are rooftop mounted, building integrated, up to 25 kilowatts. So we recommend simply requiring a building permit and New York State's Unified Solar Permit. you can get a copy of this permit on our website, and it basically asks how big's the project, what's making sure that the developer or the person who owns the home follows all applicable safety standards, etc. It's pretty straightforward. And again, these are very small projects. Tier 2 systems, we recommend that they're permitted in all districts. Again, these are very small and they're giving electricity just to that parcel, up to 110% of that electricity. And then tier 3 and tier 4, we recommend that you consider what districts they should be permitted in, definitely taking a look at your hosting capacity maps, and then using special use permits and site plan review to further that application process. So section 6 goes over tier 1 systems and the permitting requirements. So tier 1 systems I mentioned are your roof mounted systems. So on pitched roofs, the solar panels should be mounted with a maximum of 6 inches between the roof surface and the highest point of the solar system. They should also be parallel to the surface they're mounted on. And they should not extend beyond the highest point of the roof surface. You can sort of see that illustrated in this image here. On a flat roof, we recommend that the panels are not extended beyond the parapet, which is this line that you can sort of see. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Sort of there. Or more than 40 inches above the flat roof surface, whichever is higher. Something you'll see a lot on the slides, all solar panels should have anti-reflective coating, and then any height limitations would be complying with Appendix 3. And so it varies between 2 feet and 4 feet, 2 feet in the residential districts and up to 4 feet in the heavy industrial districts. And this is above the roof. And I recommend taking a look at Appendix 3 because we do break it down quite a bit, which is really nice. For building integrated systems, we recommend that the developer or the applicant shows the exact designs on the application plan to make sure that the building permit is clear and concise. And then these are some of the permitting requirements for tier 1 systems. So again, anti-reflective coating, making sure that if it's a ground mounted system, that it follows any regulations for accessory structures. Height restrictions are between 10 and 15 feet, and 10 feet if it's in residential and 15 feet if it's in heavy industrial district. Lot size subject to whatever the existing lot size requirement is. And then screening and visibility. So minimizing as much views as possible and located in a manner to avoid or blocking views from surrounding properties as much as practical. Again, treating these ground-mounted systems as accessory structures with the same setback requirements, etc. So making sure that they're screened appropriately and they keep in line with the existing zoning district. Jumping now to your tier 2 systems. And again, these systems are up to a megawatt of electricity or produce up to a megawatt of power or up to 110% of the electricity that home, that business generates in a year. So very straightforward requirements. So contact information, nameplate capacity, zoning districts it's in, adjacent land use description, if any landscaping is proposed, so tree removal, etc. And then electrical diagram to detail the system. So pretty straightforward. The next standard, these you've seen before. So all panels should have anti-reflective coating. Follow the setbacks for the accessory structure. The height should be between 10 and 15 feet, depending on the zoning district. So 10 feet if you're in a residential district and up to 15 if you're in an industrial district. Lot size, they're all the same. Screening, minimize views from the adjacent properties. And then minimizing tree removal for trees greater than 6 inches in diameter. Making sure that you maintain native vegetation and then, refrain or limit pesticide or herbicide use. So pretty straightforward. And again, these same standards are what you've seen for tier 1, so pretty straightforward. Jumping now into tier 3 systems, and we'll spend the bulk of our time here. So tier 3 systems, these are your community scale systems. These are up to 5 megawatts. And so we do have a bit of a longer process here to make sure the community is comfortable with these projects in their community. So we recommend and propose a process for approval. So first, obviously identifying what zoning districts to permit these systems in. Reviewing the application for completedness in 30 business days. After that, a public hearing notice should be submitted in compliance with any public hearing requirements your municipality has. Referring the application to the general municipal law, to the county per the general municipal law sections 239L through N review as required. So if the project is an ag district or within 500 feet of a county line, et cetera, there's certain checkboxes that trigger that 239N review. After the public hearing, the reviewing board has 62 days to take action. 62 days is a choose your own adventure. So whatever the normal review time is for your community, and it can be extended upon mutual consent. The next section of our solar law is the requirements for approval. So site plan, permit application, special use permits, and the ownership changes. And we'll go through these one by one. So for tier 3 systems, these are the application and review requirements, very straightforward. So making sure you understand the name, the address, the contact information for the system installer or the applicant or the owner operator, the nameplate capacity of the system. So this basically means how big that system is. The zoning district that system is in, property lines, any physical features of the site, a map of mineral soil groups 1 through 4 and agricultural lands on the parcel. We'll go into this a little bit more detail in the coming slides. Making sure you understand any proposed changing to landscape, grading, vegetation, lighting, etc. Erosion and sediment control plans as prepared for DEC standards, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation standards. Electrical diagrams showing the layout of equipment components, where the shutoff mechanisms are, etc., and any other National Electric Code compliant mechanisms. We also highly recommend a property operation and maintenance plan. So this is a plan that speaks to the long-term operation of the site. So how often mowing is going to happen, who's going to do a routine maintenance of the site, if there's going to be a grazing component, what's the grazing management plan. It really speaks to the life of that project. How is the project going to be maintained? And then decommissioning is a big one. So the decommissioning plan is a plan that should be kind of ironed out during this application phase. It speaks to what triggers decommissioning. So, for example, if the facility isn't running or producing electricity for a year, once the system is at its end of its natural life, the system should be decommissioned. So it speaks to what triggers decommissioning, the decommissioning actual plan. So everything will be removed. The land will be restored to its previous conditions, etc. It speaks to the time frame of that decommissioning process. It also includes a cost. So how much is it going to cost to actually remove the site? And part of that cost, and that cost should be given to you, the municipality, to review. A lot of municipalities require a decommissioning bond or surety, something where the developer basically promises to and kind of puts money away to decommission the site when decommissioning is triggered. What I've seen most often is about 150% of the cost of removal and site restoration. And we do recommend that it's revisited every 5 years, just to make sure it reflects any changes to inflation or other cost changes. So that I do highly recommend that you have. Making sure that you have a decommissioning bond or security, whatever financial mechanism your town is comfortable with, and then revisiting it just to make sure it's consistent. These are the Tier 3 permitting requirements, and we'll go through these in pretty good detail. So the first is underground requirements. So we have in our model law that all utility lines should be placed underground as much as practicable. Do keep in mind that the placement of utility lines underground is 100% up to the discretion of the utility company. You can request that the developer or the applicant asks the utility company if they can put the lines underground, but if the utility company says no, then that's kind of the end of it, if you will. Again, it's the utilities company's job to make sure that the reliability and safety of the service is not compromised. And so if they say it can't be placed underground, then that's up to their discretion. Vehicular paths, you want to make sure that the application does minimize the extent of impervious material. So minimize the amount of access roads that are needed and just ones that are required for safety or to ensure emergency access. And you can see circled here, a little bit of a roundabout is allowed for any trucks to come in and back up and turn around. The next special use permit standard is signage. So signage should be minimal, making sure that it complies with the National Electric Code for warning signs. So it should have the manufacturer's name, any safety information, and emergency contact, any equipment specification, and it should not be a big sign, no more than 8 square feet. It shouldn't be a sign that, draws attention to itself, if you will. It should simply comply with code standards. Like we saw in Tier 1 and Tier 2, all panels should have anti-reflective coating, which is frankly standard. I don't think I've seen a panel that didn't come with anti-reflective coating. Lighting, or that any lighting that is proposed is minimal, just that's required for safety. You don't want to contribute to light pollution or contribute to light influencing an abutting property. And if a developer is proposing a solar facility on multiple parcels, perhaps consider treating that permit application as a single lot to avoid project fragmentation. If, for instance, you have 2 parcels with solar and your solar law says you need to be set back 100 feet from all property lines, perhaps for this project on 2 parcels, you allow the developer, the applicant, to center the solar facility, so it isn't kind of taking away 2 middle sections of parcels. So maybe treating it multiple lots as a single lot to avoid fragmentation. The next section are lot sizes and setbacks. So you can see the 2 tables here that illustrate what we recommend for lot sizes and setbacks for Tier 5 facilities. So again, or Tier 3 facilities, which are 5 megawatt facilities. So residential facilities, 2 acres or greater than 5 acres for agriculture and residential systems. Take a look at whatever you have in your zoning district for lot sizes, but we do recommend this. And then setbacks. So these are the setback requirements. We have 100 feet in residential districts, which is a pretty good distance. And then that can be lessened in agriculture, in industrial districts to 30 perhaps. And then height restrictions. So how high or tall that solar panel will be at its max tilt, so not when it's sitting flat, when it's kind of at its max tilt, if it's a tilting panel. So we have 15 feet in low density residential districts, and then up to 20 feet in industrial districts. And then lot coverage. We don't use this one as a requirement. Yes. Fencing. So we do require a 7-foot fence, and this is per the NEC, the National Electric Code guidelines. I do recommend taking a look at the National Electric Code because there is some wiggle room in the type of fence that you can have. For instance, you can allow a 6-foot fence if it has barbed wire on the top. So there is some variation that you can have. but make sure the fencing complies with the National Electric Code. The next section is screening and visibility. So this is a big one in communities. For systems that are smaller than 10 acres, we recommend that the developer make sure they minimize views from neighboring properties using berms or landscaping, whatever they can to make sure views are minimized. For systems or projects that are larger than 10 acres, we recommend a VIA, a visual impact assessment. And this is basically a line of sight profile. A visual expert will go out to the field and they will take pictures and they'll try to see at what vantage points, who can see the parcels from this location, that location, etc. So if there's any like specific areas in your community you want that, you want to make sure you tell the applicant, like, we'd like to make sure the project isn't visible from here, etc. As a part of that visual impact assessment, usually what comes after is a screening and landscaping plan. And this is a very detailed plan that says the different plantings the applicant is proposing, the species, the height, the grading, etc. It really does a good job at trying to make sure it hits all the kind of points, if you will, highlighted by the VIA, the visual impact assessment. If, for instance, like you'd see at the bottom picture, that it's very unlikely that project will be able to be seen, the reviewing board may be able to waive that requirement if it's believed that there will be no visual impact. The next section is environmental resources. So making sure you minimize tree removal. So we recommend minimizing trees that are larger than 6 inches in diameter. Making sure the applicant proposes native vegetation that are for pollinators, that attracts game birds, songbirds, etc. But if the applicant is continuing to do farm-related activities, perhaps that can be excluded from that as a requirement. And then same thing that we saw in the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 systems, limit or refrain from using pesticides or herbicides for the long-term maintenance or operation of the facility. Then we jump into agricultural resources. I'm just going to pause here. So in our model law, we recommend that the solar facility does not occupy more than 50% of the mineral soil groups 1 through 4. And I'll explain what mineral soil groups are in a second. Let me just finish through with this slide. So mineral soil groups are basically your most productive soils. We do recommend including language that says that this threshold may be exceeded if there is a on-site farm operation that's going to be continuing, or if these prime soils or really productive soils are not viable for agricultural, so they're either too wet or too rocky, etc. And then with these systems, it is already required, but we do have a language that requires that decommissioning is done in accordance with the Department of Ag and Markets guidelines. And they do have a kind of a guidance document that applicants must follow if they're impacting mineral soil groups 1 through 4. So agricultural resources is kind of a hot topic. And so I'd like to spend kind of a few minutes kind of breaking down the different ways you can look at protecting agricultural resources. So you heard me speak of mineral soil groups 1 through 4. So these, we use this mineral soil groups 1 through 4 as defined by New York State Department of Ag and Markets to ensure that we're consistent with soil classification that's already utilized by various New York State agencies, including Department of Ag and Markets, because they made it up, not made it up, but they kind of put into law the definition, the Department of Taxation and Financing, ORES, etc. So mineral soil groups 1 through 4 are recognized as highly productive soils based on their combination of physical and chemical properties. Another way you can define ag resources are active agricultural land. And Ag and Markets has a definition, and this includes land that's been used within the past 5 years for agriculture. This includes crops, livestock products, etc. So that would be your active agricultural land, and that's land that's actively being used. And then you have your USDA kind of criteria. And so prime farmland soils as defined by USDA and RCS. These are soils that have the best physical and chemical characteristics for producing food, fiber, and other crops. And farmland of statewide importance soils do not quite meet the criteria for prime farmland or prime farmland if drained, but they're classified as mineral soils, and so they do have some priority. So again, 3 different ways to look at ag resources. We lean towards MSG 1 through 4 to be consistent, but there's a number of different ways that we've seen agricultural resources being protected. A hot topic of the day is agrivoltaics. So agrivoltaics is just what it sounds. Agriculture and photovoltaics kind of smashed into one like happy little bubble. So it's using solar facilities and the continued use of agricultural production. So you can see examples in the images there. I was just at a solar facility a few weeks ago where I saw sheep grazing. Instead of using traditional mowers, they actually use sheep to kind of mow down the grass, and it was doing really well. The sheep are really, really cute. You can also do bees, or I've seen instances where lettuce or Brussels sprouts were grown under the panels, pollinator species, etc. So this is a way to combine the best of both worlds, where the landowner can have a steady income in the photovoltaics and continue doing their farming operation, or at least the land to someone who wants to farm under the panels or between the panels. The next section that we'll jump into are ownership changes. So you want to make sure, this is an important one, that if the original applicant, if the owner of the project, for instance, changes hands, that new owner understands kind of the permit conditions and you know who's in charge of that system. So we require that you are notified within 30 days of any ownership change. And that way they assume all responsibilities that were signed on. So for instance, a decommissioning plan, they're now in charge of making sure that plan is outlined. The operation and maintenance plan, they're responsible now for making sure that plan follows the natural trajectory of its existence. So jumping now into Tier 4 systems. So Tier 4 systems, again, these are systems that are larger than 5 megawatts. These are your utility scale projects. You typically won't see like a 6 megawatt project. It's not particularly popular, but things like 20 megawatts, 25 megawatts, 100 megawatts, etc. And like I said, ORES does take a look at the local law. And so it is important to have something that speaks specifically to these larger systems. The process is pretty straightforward, so making sure you choose the district it's going to be in. It's going to be subject to all of the site plan and special use requirements that we established for the Tier 3 systems, reviewing the application, etc. We'll kind of go through that a little bit here. So we do highly recommend having that you gently force the developer or the applicant to have a pre-application meeting with you. This is a meeting where they show up, they introduce themselves, they give you kind of a very overall a good summary of their design plan, and they ask you questions, comments, concerns. Is there anything that you think we need to adjust, to change, to modify, to take a look at? This would be a good time to say, hi, we're a community and we want to make sure you take a look at this park, for instance, to make sure the solar facility can't be seen from it. So it's a good opportunity to meet the applicant and understand the location of the facility, etc. You also want to know who the contact person is. If you have any questions about the project, who can you call and reach out to? When do they anticipate submitting an application? Yeah, pretty straightforward. So I do recommend this meeting. It does iron out a lot of kinks that can be found later on without it. And the next thing we recommend is a community engagement plan. So this plan should detail the proposed plans and strategies to let the public be aware of what's going on. We do recommend that they submit this plan prior to the submission of the application, just so you can take a look and everyone can be on the same page. You want the community to be well aware of what's going on. These are your applicable Tier 3 standards that now apply to Tier 4. So the same underground requirements, making sure as much as possible, if the utility agrees, that lines are placed underground. Vehicular paths, again, making sure that you minimize impervious areas. And if there's going to be kind of an access road, there's an easy roundabout if needed. Minimize signage, make sure the signage is consistent with NEC, National Electric Code guidelines. But again, take a look because there might be some wiggle room in there for a 6-foot fence with barbed wire, etc. Glare, this is standard. Minimize lighting. These are all pretty straightforward. Oop. So these are the setback requirements that we recommend for Tier 4 larger systems. So in residential systems, 100 feet on each side, and if it's a non-participating occupied residence, it's 250 feet from all, actually in every district from all sides. Pretty straightforward. This is the requirement we have for agricultural resources for Tier 4 facilities. So you'll note that instead of using mineral soil groups 1 through 4, we're using active agricultural lands as the kind of mechanism to protect agricultural lands. So we recommend that you, in your local law, say that Tier 4 systems cannot occupy more than 50% of active agricultural lands in the facilities, and this can be wiggled a bit or waived if you're going to do agrivoltaics, or if you're going to continue doing a farm operation, or if you want someone, or if the applicant is going to bring a third party in to do a farm operation. And then again, if you're impacting mineral soil groups 1 through 4, irrelevant of this, the application will need to follow New York State Department of Ag and Market guidelines. The next section is safety. So you want to make sure that the application and the applicant follows all applicable building, residential, electric codes, fire codes, etc. They should be maintained in good working order. This includes snow removal if the fire department or the emergency services kind of group would like that. If there's going to be storage batteries on the system, they should also be following any fire and building code that's associated with those standards. And the disposal should be in accordance with every law and regulation, any applicable federal, state, county, etc. laws and regulations. This is pretty standard, but it is important to note that emergency access to the facility should be allowed for emergency first responders. So a lockbox or some kind of similar device. And a lot of that you can see in those 1 to 3 line electrical diagrams, the location of the fencing with respect to shut-off mechanisms, etc. The next section we go through is permit timeframe and abandonment. We have, again, this is a choose your own adventure, so you can see that you can modify the 36 months, but we do recommend that the final permit is valid for 3 years, provided that a building permit is issued for construction. If construction is not completed in that time, we do allow an extension. And this last bullet here is kind of a clause for decommissioning, which we talked about a little bit, where if the system doesn't produce electricity for 12 months, the municipality may notify the owner or operator to begin the decommissioning. And that must occur within 12 months, and failure to do so means that you can start seizing that money and use it for decommissioning. Next section here is enforcement and severability. So pretty straightforward, and it's usually in most local laws I've seen that violating this law could result in criminal penalties or any other bad things that could happen if you don't follow the law. So very, very straightforward. And I flew by this because I had coffee this morning. So I have a couple slides that go through the various resources we have. So comprehensive planning, we do have a very extensive comprehensive plan guidebook on our website that talks about comprehensive planning very, very well. But in this, and I'll email out the presentation when I'm done, we do have links to different resources here. So for clean energy as well. Resources on agrivoltaics, which is really exciting. Oh yeah, the Scenic Hudson is a really great resource. Highly recommend. And then a number of different funding resources and opportunities. And these are by no means extensive. They're just a very short list. And even though, yeah, very short list. And this is our homepage, and I'll just highlight a couple things. So the IRA storage and funding guide is here. You can see a long list of the various resources that we have, and we offer technical assistance and workshops. So if you want us to come to your municipality and work with you in your local law, to review your local law, to have any kind of meeting like absolutely free of charge, we are always willing and able and enthusiastic to do so. Do reach out to our email address. Here's our website, and we do our very best to get back to you as soon as humanly possible. And I will open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Camille. Appreciate that presentation. We do have a few questions in the chat or in the Q&A. The first question is, what happens to the surrounding homes when these things catch fire? Is the smoke toxic? Do we have to evacuate?
That is a good question. So solar facilities don't typically catch on fire, and then it depends on what is on fire. So I don't want to speak to I think it depends on what catches on fire and what the fire department says. I am not a fire specialist or expert, and I don't want to speak to that because I'm certainly not an expert, but I'm happy to write the question down and see if I can get an answer that's a little bit clearer from someone who actually is an expert in fire safety.
Okay, great. And I'll send you these questions at the end to Camille for follow-up. The next is under land use considerations for siting, you should add forests. NYSERDA is developing a solar scorecard for forests. Our forests are our largest land-based carbon sink and sequestration resource. So I guess that's more of a comment. Another question, how are tier 3 systems listed under SECRA, unlisted type 1 or type 2?
They're typically type 1 systems, so they'll need the full environmental assessment form to be completed.
Okay. Next question, under decommissioning, you refer to owner or operator of the system. Does this in any way refer to the fee landowner under a solar lease situation?
Does this in any way refer to the fee landowner under a situation? I'm not entirely sure that I understand. So this isn't something, so the owner operator of the system isn't the landowner. It's the person who actually, unless the landowner owns the solar facility, it's whoever, it's typically the applicant, which for tier 3 systems isn't usually the owner of the parcel, if that makes sense. So it isn't, if the landowner themselves doesn't own the facility, it isn't their responsibility to remove it because typically they're leasing their land to the solar developer.
What role does the fee owner have for ensuring decommissioning?
I've not heard this term fee owner, but if the fee owner is the landowner can also have terms in their lease with the developer to ensure decommissioning. So I've seen it as a part of site plan review and application, and then as a clause in landowner agreements with the developer. So I've seen it both ways.
Owner operators of community solar systems change over time. How does one ensure that each subsequent owner or operator remains obliged for decommissioning? So often this doesn't, the municipality isn't notified.
Okay, so in that instance, we do have a section in our model law that speaks to that. Let me see if I can safety. Yeah, I might have passed it. Reading too quickly. We do have a section in our law that says that within 30 days, the applicant or developer must notify the community if the hands change places. So there is language in our model law to speak to that. But yes, and I can find it in a second. Oh, there it is. Here, ownership changes. So we do have language that speaks to that ownership change. So it is required within 30 days. So once this is in your local law, it is enforceable.
Okay, thank you. The next is more of a comment. Under lighting consideration for subs, it would be helpful to specify dark skies lighting. Next question is, on an ownership change, would it be possible to revisit such things as the decommissioning plan to ensure it keeps pace with inflation? What about placing a time frame for revisiting the sub, such as once every 5 to 10 years? Or 10 years?
So decommissioning plan, the cost estimate should be revisited ideally every 5 years or so to make sure the cost is in line with inflation, like you said. So we do have language that speaks to that on our decommissioning slide, which is, oh, there you are. So here, so the plan should be revisited every 5 years. And I do recommend that the plan is revisited once decommissioning has been kicked off, just to make sure everyone understands what that process is going to look like. And I'm not so sure about putting a time frame to revisit the special use permit. The special use permit is evaluating the project that was designed. Ideally, the system shouldn't be modified or changed, and if it's changed, I think up to 5%, then you should then the applicant is gently forced to submit a new application. But if the facility itself doesn't change in 5 to 10 years, I'm not sure that a new permit, like reviewing it again for a new permit, would be applicable. But definitely for decommissioning, the cost estimate should be revisited every 5 years.
Great. The last question in the Q&A is for tier 4 projects. We do have projects that are in the 7 to 9 megawatt range. Those do not need state review, correct?
Correct. State review kicks off at 25 megawatts. So anything greater than 25 megawatts is the state, and under that is reviewed by the local municipality.
All right. If there are any more questions, you're free to raise your hand and I can unmute you. Hearing none. Okay. Thank you, Camille. I appreciate it. And I do see that Chairman Barrett has joined. I'm not sure, Chairman Barrett, if you'd like to say anything, any closing comments. Oops. Okay. I will also add that at CDRPC, we are working with a consultant now who will be assisting the NYSERDA's clean energy siting team. So if you have any interest in working with our consultant, just let me know. I'd be happy to connect you. Just to wrap it up, Slides and a recording of this webinar will be available afterwards. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to me or Camille directly. And thank you so much for joining. Have a nice rest of your day.